And that segues to my next point. Are prospective franchisees getting dumber?
Okay, that's a great question. I don't know that they're getting dumber. What I think is happening is they are of the belief that they are becoming smarter due to the internet. And the connection I'll say is people aren't necessarily smarter or dumber when it comes to medical advice, but they go on Dr. Google and they think they're smarter. So they're not really dumber, but they're not really smarter. Okay.
Welcome to the Franchise Hot Seat Podcast, where we talk about all things franchising. Now, here's your host, Dr. John P. Hayes.
My guest today is Gary Occhiogrosso. He's with Franchise Growth Solutions. Been in franchising a long time, starting as a young man with Dunkin' Donuts. We're going to talk about all of that and much more, Gary. Thanks for joining me today.
Oh, my pleasure, John. It's always good to see you at conferences, so I'm glad we have the opportunity to talk today.
Yeah. So let's go back to when you were a younger man and you became a Dunkin' Donuts franchisee. Most of us in franchising, we don't wake up when we're 14 or 15 or at any age and say, I think I'll be in franchising. We don't even know what it is. I was 1979 college professor, Temple University. Guy asked me to write a book about franchising. I couldn't even spell it, let alone know what it meant. How did you get in? How did you discover, franchising might be the place and Dunkin' Donuts would be a good investment?
Well, okay, I'm going to condense that in the interest of time. So my parents, my uncles, my family business at the time was Italian pastry shops that they had. Two of them in Queens. They had one in Manhattan where they started. So myself, I grew up in, I guess, what you would call a family of merchants. Okay. And what I didn't know then, but learned a few years later, because I didn't go into the family business, which was something that I think everyone in the family thought, the cousins, all the males anyway would go into the business. We didn't do that. I didn't do it. I got into the radio business and stayed there about 7 or 8 years till I got burned out. And then a neighbor of mine had opened a Dunkin' Donuts shop. And I, again, didn't know anything about franchising or what have you. And, I saw him become materially successful, so to speak. I saw different things showing up in front of his house, like cars and boats. Yeah. So I decided, well, okay, that's kind of like running a bakery, which I was somewhat familiar with. But at that point, I knew that what my parents and what my uncles had been running really wasn't a business. They had a job. They would proudly go to work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, equally proud to tell people they hadn't taken vacations in 20 years. And I thought that can't be the way to do it. That can't. And I was, I guess, 25, 26 at that point. So I applied for the franchise. I went in for my interview. I was able to scrape some money together. I owned a home already at that point, and they granted me the franchise. And at that point, and my cousin had come along with me because it wasn't something that I thought I could do alone. And I was in the franchising business as a franchisee. It sort of happened faster than if I had thought about it. Maybe I would have backed out. And that's where I really learned about franchising, not only as a franchisee. And Dunkin' back in the mid 80s was a very different concept than it is today. I mean, we basically sold coffee and donuts, and the donuts were made 3 times a day, 5 times a day, depending on the types of donuts. So it really was very labor intensive. But again, to my surprise, because I was surprised when they actually granted me the franchise, but they asked me to be on their advisory council. And what I quickly learned, and we had at that point in the New York metro market, maybe only about 400 stores, 400 owners. I quickly learned, wow, I need to be on the franchisor side of the table, not the franchisee side of the table. Not that there was anything wrong with it, but the franchisor side of the table intrigued me because of the model. the concept of franchising, and that's really where I learned about it. That's how I got involved.
You really got in fast from what the story that you're telling. Did you study franchising at all? Did anybody sit you down and say, here's what you need to know? I mean, you didn't even go look at opportunities. You just said Dunkin' Donuts. Great choice, by the way, but why? What was it? A magazine? Was it an ad? Was it, okay, let me go over to Dunkin' Donuts and apply?
No, as I said, my neighbor, he owned a Dunkin'. He bought a Dunkin'. So I kind of saw it. I didn't know anything about franchising. And as far as being trained in franchising or schooled in franchising, like you, although I'm not a full-time professor. I'm an adjunct at NYU, and part of the courses that I teach are about franchising. Well, back then, there was no such thing. So I had no idea what it was. I just knew that there was a system. I knew that there was a methodology behind it, and I had met some people in my due diligence, my validation, although we didn't call it that back then, that there were a few Dunkin' Donut owners that had a few shops. And back then, the idea of owning 500 Dunkins or 100 Dunkins was not really possible for a lot of reasons, mostly because of the complexity of the operation. But I realized that, all right, here are some folks, they're running a business. They're not working 12 hours a day like my dad and my uncles were doing, and they were not working 7 days a week. And yet it was a 24-hour business at that time. And I thought, well, how could that? Because they have a system.
Yeah. That's an important word. We'll come back to it, but I'm still intrigued by, because I say to people, well, my brother-in-law is doing really well in this and I want to buy one too. And my answer is always, I think I've written about this and spoken about this, you're not your brother-in-law. And that could be good or bad. But just because your neighbor is succeeding at Dunkin' Donuts doesn't mean Gary Occhiogrosso is going to succeed in a Dunkin' Donuts. I mean, we didn't know that. You didn't know that then, but you know that now.
Absolutely.
That, personality, capabilities, the way you look at life, how hard you want to work, how much money you've got, but that's probably the least of it in franchising because of that system that we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
So, I would say to people, no, don't be led into franchising because of the boat that sits in front of your neighbor's house.
Absolutely. So there's actually a few more pieces to that puzzle. One is that having grown up in a family business that was involved in bakeries and pastries, I thought there was a connection between donuts and that, so that sort of made sense to me. And then I knew what I was good at and what I wasn't good at. And I was good at sales because I had done some of that in the radio business. Yeah. And I mentioned earlier, I sort of dragged my cousin along who was an aviation engineer. So I figured he'd be good with like all the machines in the back and I could deal with selling. So that was really the only connection I had. But I would, like you, I mean, in hindsight, if we're counseling people, I would tell them, don't do what I did, because, maybe there was 40% intelligence and 60% luck on that. Because owning a franchise, and sometimes, as folks think, well, I buy the franchise and I sort of it automatically happens. Right. And we know it doesn't. It's hard work, and you need to be connected to the mission and the purpose and what you're good at. Otherwise, I would say, regardless of the system, you run a higher risk of failure.
Yeah. How did it work out for you? Was it a good investment? Did you keep it for a while?
I had it.
One, or?
No, going multiple at that point, we did purchase one, but we flipped it. But no, going multiple at that point was very difficult. Again, because of the operation itself. We had it for just under 5 years. We did well when we were there. We did very well when we sold it. It was one of the very few stores up to that point that Dunkin' actually bought back because they wanted to control the real estate.
Okay.
It was in Queens, New York, on a very busy road. And then we launched another franchise. We got involved in the Minuteman Press franchise, which we did, I think more so I did to help my partner at that point, because I knew that wasn't really something for me, but there was a lot of sales involved. So sort of got it launched and then went into consulting, realizing that what I had learned at a big company like Dunkin was valuable to startup franchisors. And I sort of leveraged that in the late 80s and early 90s and got a few clients and sort of built it from there.
Mm-hmm. Great. All right. Well, good introduction. I loved Bill Rosenberg, founder of Dunkin' Donuts. He and I were friends for numerous years. And of course, Roy Titus was the founder of Minuteman Press, New York-based. His son Ray, founder of Sinorama and other concepts, and Ray Titus and his family endowed the Titus Center for Franchising, where I teach at Palm Beach Atlantic University. So small world in a way, but wow, has it gotten bigger? Because back then, we had maybe a couple thousand franchise brands. Now more than 4,500 franchise brands in North America. And I have never, since my introduction to franchising in 1979, I have never seen more enthusiasm about franchising than today. More concepts to buy at all price ranges, and probably more service businesses now than we had before. Not as many, with still a lot of food businesses. It makes up about a third of franchise concepts, but now a lot more opportunities for people. And there are more people who want to buy, more franchisors, more prospective franchisees. And I'm all for that, because I'm going to keep going back to that word system, which is so important. But I'm always concerned at Franchise Hot Seats. I'm always concerned that, are we overselling? Are we saturating? Are we not being careful enough about who we encourage to become a franchisee? Because they don't all succeed. They're not turnkey in the sense that, okay, you put up your money and you get some training and you go to work, turn the key, and voila, you're making money. No, we know that doesn't happen. There are prospective franchisors who should not become franchisors. There are prospective franchisees that don't belong in a franchise. They need to have a job. So these are issues that I'm concerned about. What do you see there? What's the progression, and does it worry you about where we are today?
Well, I agree with you 100%. I mean, to pre-frame what I'm about to say, we tell a lot of our clients, I tell clients that sometimes I'm in the business of telling people what they don't want to hear. And I'm perfectly okay with that. Okay. At 66 years old, I have nothing to prove. Okay. I will tell you that there are people, as you point out, there are people who are not cut out to be franchisors, and there are people who are cut out not to be franchisees. And I believe that what's happening in the industry today, first of all, there's a certain dilution of what is actually a concept that creates enough points of differentiation where it has appeal in the market. And that to me is a big piece, because when you're launching any brand, franchised or otherwise, if you're not going to be able to create a mark, if you will, that has little to do with the product, okay, little to do with the product, and more about how the guest or the customer feels using that product or that service, then you're just another one of whatever, and you're probably competing on price or something like that. So that's the first piece that I look at. The other piece, and I think you mentioned or you asked, are we overselling? You bet we are. I know a lot of people would, love to take shots at me, but franchising really is about educating both the franchisor, if we're doing a fran dev project, and educating the potential franchisee, and sort of letting them know what they're getting in for. The hype, the selling, the turnkey, all of that wears off very quickly the first time something goes wrong. So my thoughts are, I don't know that I would say I'm concerned. I'm aware. Maybe I don't have the level of statistical information that you have that would elevate it to concern, but I will say that it is something we focus on our FranDev component and on our franchise sales component.
Okay. So let's talk about that for a moment. Franchise growth solutions. Do you do both? You will develop a new franchise concept to establish a brand for a franchisor. And then do you also broker deals for franchisors? Are you selling franchises, or do you just sell for companies that you bring into the franchise arena as franchisors?
Okay, great question. We don't broker in the sense of, say, like a broker network where the franchise consultant or broker, they have different names these days, but they're brokers in my world, has access to maybe hundreds of franchises, and it's sort of like a real estate broker that has access to the MLS listings, okay? We don't do that. We represent the brands that we develop, as well as brands that might come to us that are already franchised. And then they come into our FSO as a franchise. We're a franchise sales organization. What we do differently and what we're very proud of, because my partner and I are both restaurant operators, we do have some service brands, but we focus on the restaurant industry for a variety of reasons. One being, it seems no one else wants to touch it. It's expensive. It's difficult. It's hard to find the proper franchisee because everybody wants to be in the restaurant business, but everyone can't be. And from that point of view, what we look to do is represent those brands exclusively. So our clients generate their own inquiries, and then they come into our fold, and then we represent that brand specific to that inquiry.
Okay, that makes sense. So the thing that I've noticed about food franchising, I started teaching the A to Z's of buying a franchise at franchise expos across the country and across the world as far as that goes, but mostly in the United States. And I started in late 1980s at International Franchise Association expos. The biggest one being the International Franchise Expo in New York City every year at the Javits Center. And I do a lot of the regional ones. I'm doing one here in a couple weekends in South Florida. So I would always ask people, I would have 100 people in the room for my seminar, and I would ask them, how many of you, if you were to buy a franchise today, know that it will be in the food and beverage industry? And about 60% of the hands would go up. And I've done this at every expo that I've taught through all of these years. If I have 100 people in Fort Lauderdale in a weekend or two when I'm down there teaching, and I ask that question of 100 people, maybe 5 hands will go up. They don't want to buy food and beverage anymore. They're buying service businesses. And there must be some good reasons for that. Have you noticed this? Is there a drop-off of and you don't represent only food and beverage. You have Resi Brands as one that I know that you represent. So maybe you have others that are not food.
So it's a great question, and the short answer is yes. And I think there's a host of reasons for that. Restaurant, the investment cost of opening a restaurant. We deal primarily with fast casual restaurants or quick service restaurants. The cost to launch can be upwards of $500,000, $600,000, even approaching $1 million. When you look at the sales to investment ratio and the return on that investment and the cash required, it becomes prohibitive for a lot of folks. Whereas if I were to open up, let's take that one painter, that's a Resi brand. If I can step up to the plate with $50,000 in cash, maybe even a little bit less, to turnkey that business, to really invest in it and open it up, is under $100,000. I don't need to build a building or fit out a restaurant and order equipment. So I can go into business faster and at a lower cost. And I think when we look at this move, as you pointed out earlier, of so many people wanting to be in franchising, obviously it's a bigger universe of people, which means there are more folks who have lesser investment capability. So the service brands are serving that market. And when we talk, the last few years, we've heard about the Great Resignation. And I used to say, well, you know where all those people are going, don't you? They're all going to franchising because they're going somewhere. And I think, for the individual that might be able to leverage a 401k or may have some equity in their home, a service brand is certainly something that is easy to launch. On the consumer side, there's more and more need for folks. I mean, I don't mow my own lawn. I don't paint my own house. I have someone come in every week and sort of clean it up, clean up the house. So the need for service brands as people become busier, either running businesses or working, if they're married couple, chances are both mom and dad are out working. So there's a greater need, lower cost of entry.
Yeah. How out of, let's say 10 people approach you and say, I want franchise growth solutions to turn my business into a franchise. And I'm sure there are a lot of questions you ask, but I want to go right to the bottom line. Of 10 requests like that, how many will you say no to for whatever reason? And talk about some of those reasons.
Yeah, we probably say no to 4 or 5 of them, maybe half of them.
Yeah.
The reasons, there's a few reasons. First and foremost, we need to know that the founder or the person who's launching the franchise, that their mindset, that their head is in the right place. If they're of the belief that they're just going to collect a bunch of franchise fees up front and become, the next Ray Kroc or whatever is going on in their head, unless we can educate and move them off of that, there's no chance in the world that we're going to work with them because they don't have their franchisees' best interest at heart. And what I mean by that is, we tell folks you need to think of your franchisees into some respect as your children. You need to want more for them than you want for yourself. And not everyone is cut from that mold. So that's the first piece, the mindset. Mm-hmm. The second thing I would say is this a viable business from a financial point of view? So we will take a P&L of these businesses and we will drop them into a model that my partner invented that will basically take that business and look and say, this is what it would look like if it were a franchisee, meaning we're plugging in royalties, we're plugging in brand development, we're plugging in advertising, we're plugging in other fees. Entrepreneurs who may run 1 or 2 or 3 of their own units, they run it as an entrepreneurial business. And what we need to do is take it to a professionally managed business. And when you do that, you may be making money if you're doing all sorts of things, but your franchisee won't make money. And we look to say in the restaurant business, we're looking to say minimum 15%. We like to see 18 or 19% after royalties. We like to see a 2-to-1 sales to investment ratio. So if the numbers don't make sense, so we look at the sales to investment ratio. We look to see that the percentage on the bottom line makes sense. Otherwise, why invest in the business? It may end up just being a job. And then we look at the market need. Does the world really need another pizza shop? Does the world really need another hamburger joint? Well, unless you can come up with those points of differentiation that I mentioned earlier that sort of speaks to the guest experience, it may not be a viable opportunity for us. Someone else may franchise it, but it won't be us.
What does it cost today to go to Franchise Growth Solutions and say, okay, I got a business, and you check it out and you say, yeah, this is a business that can be franchised. What will it cost to become a franchisor?
Well, okay. So let's talk about the entire cost, okay? Because some companies out there only like to talk about the cost, like their little piece. But that can be extremely misleading. Okay, most good operations manuals, and our operations manuals are different from our competitors. A, they're not templates. B, we don't simply go in and write down what the franchisor is doing. We go in, it's a ground up manual, and we go in very often and reinvent their systems so that they're capable of scaling. Because what they may be doing for 1 or 2 units may not work for 10 or 20 or 100. So I would tell you that a competent, good set of operations manuals, which usually is about 6 or 7 different manuals, from site selection to construction and marketing and managing the business, somewhere between 35 and 50 grand, depending on the company. And then you would need to hire an attorney to do a franchise disclosure document, which could be anywhere from $15,000 to $25,000. And then you need a properly produced landing page or website, not a consumer site. We're not selling hamburgers or pizza, selling franchises. So that would, that's another, call it 5 or 6 grand. So I would say to package your concept as a franchise may run somewhere in the $70,000 to $80,000 range, but that's not really it. Okay. That is very misleading. That's great if all you want to do is sell someone a manual or sell someone an FDD or sell someone a website. But remember, we're connected to the sales piece. No one else does that. So we need to go and make sure our client understands things like cost per acquisition. You might have to spend $15,000 or $20,000 in lead generation to sell your first franchise. So now if you're going 5-6 months, you might invest another $50,000 or $60,000 in lead generation. So it's not 75. It might really be $150 in order to get it going. Yeah. So we let them know that, because what good is it to have an FDD and a manual and a website and no capital, no ability to generate leads? And many franchisors think, I want to say all, but it isn't all, but it's many, maybe most, will say, well, people come into my shop every day and they ask me if I'm a franchise or my friend. And we all tell them, yeah, that's fine, until you tell them that it costs $600,000 to open one of your restaurants, right, and they need $250,000 in cash, and they've got to be bankable for the rest. Once you tell them that, they're no longer interested. Right. So we feel it's better to tell the entire story up front. Maybe the person doesn't like us and maybe they think we're negative, but it's easier for us because it gets messy at the back end when it doesn't happen.
Sure. So how is it that there are companies out there saying that we will develop your franchise, we'll turn you into a franchisor for $29,000 or $19,000? How is that possible?
Okay. So it's not. Okay. And I guess I would qualify saying it's not by first saying I would need to understand that person's definition of a franchise. Mm-hmm. If they're talking about taking an ops manual that might be, I don't know, 100 pages. I mean, a good ops manual is 200-300 pages. They might take a 50 or 100-page manual and simply run a Word document and say, find the word burrito and replace it with the word pizza. Exactly. Okay. And then write a template FDD and have some lawyer sort of rubber stamp it and not worry about whether it's ever going to get approved in a registration state like New York or California. Yeah. Maybe. But in my world, it's not possible.
Mm-hmm. And yet we see this going on. And I also see this at these expos. I'll go talk to exhibitors, particularly new emerging concepts, and I'll ask them, how many franchises have you sold? Well, we haven't sold any. How long have you been a franchisor? About a year, 18 months. Wow. This is scary to me, because these are people who have paid $100,000, $200,000 to invest in becoming a franchisor, and yet haven't sold a franchise. Could be a lot of reasons for that. Many times when I meet with these folks at their booth at an expo, I say to myself, I know why they're not selling franchises. They don't know how. Nobody's trained them. They don't want to spend money on an FSO or a broker or in-house to have a salesperson. So how do we educate these people?
Yeah, great question. I'm going to go back to Resi Brands and the founder, Stephen Montgomery, when it was simply that one painter, because when we launched that franchise, we were with them. I think we launched it on June 5th of 2021, and we were with them until February of 2022 as their FSO. Now, what Stephen did was Stephen wanted to know, and he said right from the beginning, hey, We're going to work together 6, 7, 8 months. I want to eventually take this in-house. What do I need to know? So in addition to selling those first 6 or 8 or 10 franchises, I don't recall how many we sold the first 6 months. What we focused on was things like, how do you market? What's the persona of your buyer? What should your cost per lead be? What should your pipeline, what should your response rate be? And how many people come in that respond, that go into the pipeline, get an FDD? What is that process of vetting them? How do you follow up? So we spent a lot of time on the phone and in Zoom meetings and working together, that by February of the following year, call it 7 months later, 8 months later, he was ready to take it in-house, made the investment, brought in a franchise person. And the rest, I will tell you, with Resi Brands is ongoing history in the making, because they're up over 100 units in about 26 months.
And is that an exception, or are you finding more startups like Resi Brands?
Well, in my recent memory, Resi Brands probably the exception for a few reasons. Great concept, great motivated founder who definitely wants more for his franchisees. I mean, Steven definitely wants more for his franchisees than he wants for himself. And they had the financial backing. But what I am seeing with Service Brands, another associate of mine, a guy named Dan Claps, just launched a brand called Voda.
Yeah.
And I believe within the first 3 months, he's awarded 5 or 6 franchises. Now, here's my concern. You used the word concern earlier. Yeah. Is the franchisor prepared to properly teach, service, and launch those? Because there are companies out there that will go, well, we sold 100 franchises the first year, and we got 300 in development and all this other good stuff. And then when I further investigate, you sold 150, but you have like 5 opened. So what are we doing? Are we in the business of selling franchises, or are we in the business of building a brand based on a foundation of successful franchisees? What are you doing? Mm-hmm. So that's what I would say. I think it's more of an anomaly that these brands go from 0 to 60 and are successful. I think you can be aggressive, but you need to be responsible.
Mm-hmm. I don't know how many emerging brands are out there. Supposedly there's a new franchise brand started every day in North America. I have no trouble believing that. But I would like to know the percentage of them that aren't off the ground after, let's say, 18 months to 2 years, don't even have a franchise sold. Or maybe they have 3, but they've given them away to relatives. I think it's probably a startling number.
Yeah, probably the majority. I think where it becomes important for us is you need to have, like we'll tell our clients on the restaurant side, if we are able to find the right 5 people within the first 12 months, and we're able to open up 3 units within the first 15 to 20 months, let that happen. Let's get some validation. Let's get some history, learn how to be a franchisor. We can still bring some people in, but don't hit the gas pedal because you don't know the other markets. We have to help you figure out supply chain. There's a lot more to it than just selling franchises. If you're going to, again, back earlier, I said, I was a kid when I opened up my Dunkin, but Dunkin had a safety net. A lot of these emerging brands, they don't have a safety net. They don't know equipment suppliers. They don't know supply chain. They don't know real estate. It's the guy that owns the 2 pizzerias, and all of a sudden he's a franchisor. Well, that's fine, but now you're taking someone else's money. Maybe they're quitting their job and mortgaging their house. Sort of their life is in your hands.
Yeah.
It's serious stuff.
That's serious. And that segues to my next point. Are prospective franchisees getting dumber?
Okay, that's a great question. I don't know that they're getting dumber. What I think is happening is they are of the belief that they are becoming smarter due to the internet. And the connection I'll say is people aren't necessarily smarter or dumber when it comes to medical advice, but they go on Dr. Google and they think they're smarter. So they're not really dumber, but they're not really smarter. Okay. Right. So
that's a very polite way of saying they're dumber.
Well, all right. I'm being diplomatic. It used to be that folks' first interaction with the franchisor on an information basis was when they spoke to a representative of the franchisor. Right. Now there's a lot of investigative work that's done up front, usually online. Mm-hmm. I don't have a problem with it as long as it's unbiased information. So much of it is curated by the franchisor. Yeah. It's advertisement made to look like editorial or education. And that, for me, I tell folks, because like you, I speak at IFA and at the Javits Center. I tell folks all the time, listen, the IFA website ain't the sexiest website in the world. Okay. But there's resources. Okay. You should go and get independent information, find those resources so you can learn about franchising as a business, and then start to do some soul searching as to what might make sense for yourself before you ever start clicking the portals and talking to franchisors.
Yeah. And unfortunately, people don't do that. There's an overabundance of information because of the internet or Google. And as you pointed out, a lot of this is advertorial. It doesn't look like an advertisement because they've written it in an article, an editorial, but it's coming from the franchisor or someone who the franchisor is paying. And it's not necessarily the best information that you need to know about making a decision about investing in a franchise. Mm-hmm. People just don't want to do the due diligence in many cases.
Yeah, look, we're not into doing the work. We're not into the delayed gratification. It's gimme. Hey, I'm going to buy a franchise and I'm going to be successful. It's automatic. Franchising works. And when you look at the numbers, and there's a great book. I'm sure you know Scott Greenberg. Yeah. He wrote this great book called The Wealthy Franchisee, and it's really about mindset and work. And unless you're prepared to work hard, work smart. Franchising or any other business is just, it's not going to be for you. I think people are just looking for the easy way out. It's unfortunate, but there is no easy way out. There is no easy money. I'm sorry to say,
So for about 35 years, I've been a huge fan of the DISC personality profile. And there are numerous personality profiles. I don't have a student who I don't give a DISC to, because if I'm going to work with you, I need to know how to talk to you. And to know how to talk to you, I need to know about your personality, your strengths and your weaknesses. And I use the DISC because it is easy and it is inexpensive. You can go do the same thing with a more expensive model. And most of these personality profiles are built on DISC, which has been around since the 1950s. Very few franchisors require a personality profile. Very few prospective franchisees even know to say, hey, should I do a profile and match my profile to the franchisor's profile or the business's profile to see if it's a match? Otherwise, it's probably going to be a divorce at some point. Where do you come in on profiling and the value of it in franchising?
Well, we recommend it strongly. When I was a franchisor, we didn't finalize any franchise agreement and we used a company up in Toronto who did a franchisee evaluation, a performance evaluation. And sometimes it was interesting. Sometimes the prospective franchisee would push back, but our response and honestly was, the more we know about who you are, the better position we're in to help you become successful. And very often we would use it to really understand their like or dislike or their personality towards sales or operations. Because if someone was skittish, see, like I'm a sales guy, but I'm also sort of over a little on the top. I'm a D, by the way, with some I, okay, but I'm a D. My partner's a C. Okay, it's kind of good. Okay, so what
It
we
drives
would
you nuts, but that's good.
well, yeah, both ways. But
Right.
the point I'm getting at is if we knew we were dealing with an individual that was, let's say, skittish about sales, okay, that's where we would spend more time. We wouldn't want someone running a restaurant who was hiding in the office or hiding in the restaurant in the kitchen. We'd want them out front with the customers or going to a chamber meeting and meeting people,
Yeah.
and we would sort of push it. Without that level of intelligence, we would never know. You'd never know that because the franchise sales process, for the lack of a better word, even if you run it out on a 90-day sales cycle, there's only X amount of hours you're meeting with that person. Do you really know them? I don't believe so. Do you think so? No, of course not.
No. And I learned this when I was CEO of Homevestors, We Buy Ugly Houses, and I succeeded the founder. There were 220 franchises when I became the president of the company. And I wanted to know, why are some of our franchisees able to buy more than 100 houses a year, and there are others who can't buy 3? And the ones who can't buy 3 say that we're crooks, that we sold them a bill of goods, that we didn't train them, we didn't do this, our advertising sucks, et cetera, et cetera. And yet we knew none of that was true. And when I went and looked, the founder had required every prospect to take a DISC profile. When I looked at the top 50 franchisees, all of them had D in the first or second position, either DI or ID, something like that. When I looked at the bottom 75, at least, franchisees who were suffering and creating all the chaos in our business, there might have been a D here and there, but not very many, and none in the first position. These were people who could not buy an ugly house because they weren't good salespeople. Even though they were buying, they were salespeople. They couldn't do that. If we could identify that up front as a franchisor, we could minimize the bottom 10% or so. Everybody's going to have crybabies. Everybody's going to have misfits. If you've got 100 franchisees, you've probably got 20 of them that should not be there. And you would have known that had you profiled them. But franchisors don't do it. They're more eager to collect the franchise fee. And franchisee prospects, unfortunately, aren't thinking clearly enough to understand, if I'm not a fit, this isn't going to work for me. Let me take the time to do a profile and look for the brand and there will be dozens of them that are right for me. We're just too much in a hurry on both sides.
Yeah, well, we're overselling. I mean, franchise salespeople, a big part of what they do is excite the buyer. And the last thing the buyer needs to be, and I say this metaphorically, but the last thing they need to be is excited.
Yeah.
They need to be clear thinking, not excited to the point where they're not, they're just, it's reckless abandon. So, again, that's part of, in the restaurant business, it's almost built into a certain extent because there's a lot to know, and you need good upfront cash, and you need to be bankable. So it almost stalls the process. Just it's intrinsic in the nature of the restaurant industry. In others, maybe not so much. You just, hey, I got a van, it's wrapped, and I'm ready to go. And look, I can talk about this all day, but I'm sure I would, people would think, boy, this guy's the most negative guy on the planet. I'm not. I'm the most positive person on the planet, but I don't think you just jump in. You don't jump off the cliff and figure out how to build a parachute on the way down, as they say.
And we're the most positive people about franchising as a methodology for building a business, scaling a business, and building your personal fortune. But it's not for everybody. And not all franchise brands will work for everybody. And yet, we're not doing a good enough job of educating people, which is part of why I'm online, and part of why I teach, and part of what I share. So I said at the beginning, system, important word. We're going to come back to that as we get near the end here. What is a system, and why in the heck do we care whether or not the business has a system or a series of systems.
Yeah, well, all right. I'm going to take a couple of pages, phrases, paraphrase from sort of my mentor, although I've only met him twice, Michael Gerber, and his book, The E-Myth Revisited. Although I will say I recently started a book called Work the System by Sam Carpenter, which is almost like a sequel to that. So why do we need a system? Again, if I go back to how my dad and my uncles ran their bakeries, there was no system. They just went to work every day, and whatever was in front of them is what they did. When you have that system in place, and systems are everything from how the person behind the POS system greets the guest. People always are amazed. They go into a Chick-fil-A, which is technically not a franchise, but that's another story. Yeah. Okay. And how, I go crazy if I ask my server for water and they go, sure, no problem. I realize it's good intentioned, but it makes me nuts because it's not about no problem. It's about my pleasure. And that's what it's about. And that's a system. The fact that they say that is a system. Yeah. How many items you have on your order guide. And what happens there is, again, the idea that people run the system, to quote Gerber, people run the system and the system runs the business. That's how your business is able to operate without you. Your business should run as well without you as it does with you. Yeah. And that's the need for a system so that you have a repeatable process over and over and over again. You can train people. You set your team members up for success. You don't just throw them into this like mishmash of things going on. They can learn each station, cross-training. It's great for labor. A system to me is what it's all about. You can't operate without a system.
And a top obligation of a franchisor is to build that system and make sure that it's transferable to a franchisee. And a franchisee's top obligation is to make sure they're compatible with the system. Right. Otherwise, we're going to have failure. Yeah. And that always is my concern. This isn't good for franchising. All these additional franchise brands, as much as I love them and participate and help many people, is this going to be good long-term for franchising? I'm not suggesting that we stop developing new concepts, not at all. Of course, we've got to do that. And I'm not suggesting that people stop buying franchises. I'm suggesting that we know what we're doing when we offer a franchise and we follow the rules and regulations or the intended rules and regulations. Same for franchisees. You've got to go into it as an educated franchisee. And so many people are not today. We got to guard against that.
I agree. I'm with you 100%. I think when it doesn't happen that way, when there are the people, I call them the clowns and the con men, they give the business a bad name. And then, unfortunately, instead of people investigating a franchise with an open mind, if they're not going in, with rose-colored glasses, they're going in with their guard up. And that's equally dangerous because now educational information is not penetrating because they're going, oh, you want to, they're doing this. So for me, and I'm not a regulation guy, don't get me wrong, I am not a regulation guy, but there are regulations in our business that need to be enforced in a better way, as well as more education on both the franchisor and the franchisee side, without a doubt.
Well, Gary, I appreciate all the information. We're in agreement on many of these points, and we'll continue to be out there educating people about franchising.
Yep. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be on with you, John. I hope to see you again soon.
Thanks for tuning in to the Franchise Hot Seat Podcast with Dr. John P. Hayes. Tune in next time for more conversation around all things franchising.